Arden, Lynn. Are David and Kristen here? Okay, well, I'd like to introduce you, not to speak right away, but I would like the others to know who you are, like I didn't. So could you stand up, please? Oh, I'm Maureen Prohl. Thank you. I'm the chair of this meeting. David Keith and Kristen Johnson are running for as school board reps. So we will be hearing from them towards the end of the meeting. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Let's start off with the planning board, chair of the planning board committee or planning board, and Adam Ricker, our town planner. They're going to speak to the zoning amendments that we're going to see on our ballot on Tuesday.
Good morning, I'm Adam Ricker, the town planner and zoning administrator. So if you want to, does everyone have a copy of the town report in front of them if you want to follow along? There's some up here on the stage, maybe we can pass those out to folks. It's also up on the screen, but sometimes the screen's a little far away. I have one in my office, but this is my make a mess of copy. That's right, my home copy. Yep. So the second section you'll see the tab that says zoning on the sides. So there's the first tab, which is the warrant, and then the second one, so it starts on, I think it's Z1, which is not all that helpful because the section before it is W, so it's after W7. And so if you flip to the first page, we have 5 zoning amendments on the ballot this year. 4 of them are relatively simple and straightforward, and one's a little bit more complex. So I'll try to go through the 4 more simple ones relatively quickly because we have somewhat limited time so that we can allow a little bit more time for the housing-focused amendment, which is a little bit more complex. So of the 5 zoning amendments, 4 of them were proposed by the planning board, and 1 was a petitioned zoning amendment. So zoning amendments can end up on the ballot in one of 3 ways. Either the planning board proposes them, the select board proposes them, or somebody with 25 signatures of registered voters can petition for a zoning amendment. And the petitions go on the ballot without any ability by the planning board or anybody else to alter them. So we did get one of those this year, so we'll go through that one. So we'll start with amendment number 1, which you see up on the screen here, and the first one on page Z1. So back in, I think it was 2018, the Barn Playhouse was added as an institutional district. So we added a theater institutional district for the properties that the barn owns. And we already had institutional districts that were for the college, the hospital, and a college recreational. And so with these institutional districts, we had a separate portion of our sign ordinance that dealt directly with those institutional districts that allows them. It recognizes that their uses are a bit unique and that conforming to the traditional sign regulations is an unreasonable assumption. And so it provides them some latitude and a different process for which they go through sign approvals. Unfortunately, it was not clear that this included the Barn Playhouse. And so it was written in a manner that could be interpreted so that it did include them, but then it also later on called out just specifically those 3 institutional districts that existed prior to 2018. And so the planning board wanted to make sure that it was clear that it includes all of our institutional districts, including the theater institutional district. And so to do that, we simply took out language that specifies which districts and are just leaving it at institutional districts. And the thought process behind this is that if there were institutional districts that are added down the line or the boundaries are changed at some point, this would not have to then be addressed every single time we add something under the umbrella of an institutional district. So it's a relatively simple modification to the amendment, but pretty important for the Barn Playhouse. They're sort of at a disadvantage to the other institutional districts that we were striving to include them in. So we'll get through maybe the first 4 that are more simple and then go back for questions on those 4 if that works for folks. Does that work, Maureen? Okay. So the second amendment here that you see starting at the bottom of Z1 is something that's relatively novel for towns. So as you've probably all seen elsewhere, there are new electric vehicle charging facilities being built in communities that are essentially gas stations for electric cars. And unfortunately, the way our zoning ordinance is written, we only allow special exceptions for filling stations. And so we had a consultation with our attorney to sort of decide whether or not a filling station of electricity could be cataloged under that use. And unfortunately, because of the definition of filling station being tied directly to petroleum, we can't include electric vehicle charging stations under that overall filling station umbrella. So what we decided to do is to define an electric vehicle charging facility and to add it in as an approved use by special exception, just as filling stations are. So essentially all this does is treat them the same as a traditional gas station. There's no difference to the process. Now, a special exception is a little bit different than a use that's allowed by right. So if something is allowed by right in the zoning ordinance, then they can go directly to the planning board for site plan review and go through that process. If it's allowed by special exception, there's a process at the zoning board that happens prior to being allowed to apply for site plan review. And it's a lesser threshold than a variance, which a variance is required when something is just not allowed by the zoning ordinance. And that has a whole set of criteria that go along with it. Sure. And so anyways, this would just be adding this in under the commercial districts, and you see it right here after filling stations. We would add in electric vehicle charging stations, and then it would go on to include the existing components of automobile repair, car wash, and uses incidental there too. And then the 4th amendment, which you find starting near the top of page Z2. Or 3rd, I'm sorry. It's in the 4th section of Article 21. So the 3rd amendment here is an amendment to the cutting process that occurs in the wetlands and in the waterfront buffer. So as you may be aware, when people want to cut vegetation within 50 feet of our waterfront or within a wetlands buffer, there's a process for scoring the trees and the vegetation there. In order to allow them to remove vegetation, they have to maintain a minimum threshold of points. And depending on what their point values are, depends on whether it's approved administratively or whether it finds its way to the planning board through an application. But even when someone cuts a tree, they are required to leave the roots in place so they can cut it off flush with the ground, but there's no stump grinding below ground or removing the overall root system. And this has been this way for decades at this point. And we were approached by the Messer Pond Protective Association, who has worked really hard to improve the water quality of Messer Pond, and now they're shifting their focus to addressing some of the invasive species and the non-native aquatic species to try to eradicate them as best they can in the Messer Pond watershed so that they don't continue to choke out native species that are good for the health of the water in the pond. Unfortunately, for some of those species, the best practice is removing the actual root system. That's the only way you can really get rid of them, is to get rid of the rhizome or whatever it is that exists below ground. And so the Protective Association approached us with this draft of the ordinance that would allow for the removal in the case of invasive and aquatic species in existence. Essentially, their only way of doing this now would be to find their way to the zoning board and ask for a variance prior to the approval for the removal. And so the planning board felt like this was a reasonable request, that the intention is to protect our water bodies, and that it doesn't allow you to remove the roots of your pine tree that you have to take down because it's rotting. It is only invasive and non-native aquatic species that would be able to be removed there. And then that's sort of the broad overlay of that. I am going to skip number 4. Number 4 is the housing one. We'll come back to that. And so let's jump down to zoning amendment number 5, which is a few pages away because number 4 is long. So it's Z14. All right. Everyone find it okay? All right. So this is the petition zoning amendment. So a group of citizens got together and brought this forward. And so our zoning ordinance is constructed in a permissive format. So what that means is that unless something is written in the zoning ordinance as an approved use, it's not allowed. And so what we have are areas around town that have existed for decades in many cases, where there are public trail networks or conservation areas. So, perhaps Knights Hill Nature Preserve is a good example of that, where it's not explicitly allowed in the zoning ordinance that be a conservation area and have nature and hiking trails. And so this group felt that it was important to petition an amendment that would codify in our zoning ordinance that they be legalized and allowed so that there was not any ambiguity there. The planning board, so when you get a petition zoning amendment, because the planning board is not the one putting forward, and you can assume that if the planning board is putting forward an amendment that they support it, so when there's a petitioned amendment, the planning board actually takes a vote on it as to whether or not they support it, and that goes on the ballot. So that's why this is the only amendment you see that has this text at the end that says the planning board supports this amendment, so that they're sort of getting their opportunity to weigh in on something that didn't start with their group. So I think now is probably a good time for questions on those first 4. If Michael, did you have one?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I did. A couple questions. On the first part, very first thing we discussed, let's see, number 1, with respect to institutional districts, is the term institutional, I don't have the zoning ordinance in front of me and I haven't committed it to memory. So my question is the term institutional districts defined elsewhere in the ordinance?
It is not defined, but it is the heading of Article 10.
But we don't have a definition as to what uses constitute institutional. We just added theater, we have college, we have others. I think we might want to, in the future, maybe next year, include a definition, because if you don't have a definition in the ordinance, you're going to rely on the standard law, the standard dictionary, common dictionary. We don't want to get caught in that. If institutional districts means certain things, I think we should include it in the definitions for next year.
We will note that.
And the other question I had was, it's a little late for this, the waterfront buffer article.
I'm sorry?
The waterfront buffer article, I don't see any reference in there, as you aware from our zoning board of adjustment hearings, when people request a variance with waterfront buffer and they're going to disturb it, we only allow them to plant plantings that are on the approved list, and yet I see no reference to said list in any amendments proposed to this article. And I was just wondering, why did we leave that out? We just said at the discretion of the planning board. Well, we have a whole list provided by the state as to what plantings are permissible and what plantings are not. Should we not make a reference to that in here somewhere?
And I think that the planning board's history on that has been that they've defaulted to the state requirements for the shoreland overlay, that they already require that. And so that's sort of codified in state law over and above.
Okay, I'm sure
that's my understanding as to why the planning board has not gone down that road here, because it would really be duplicative of what's required.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions on the first 4 or 3 or 4? 3.
My name is Phyllis Pietro, and I have a number of questions relating to wetlands and the treatment of wetlands. Maybe I'll sit down and point to it here on page Z5, the bottom of the page, toward the bottom, it says overlay district boundaries. And it says workforce housing shall be prohibited on properties that are within the shoreland overlay district. No reference to wetlands there, none whatsoever. And then it says amend to include all of College Lot 33 and Hospital Lot 18. That suggests to me, I am not a lawyer, but it suggests to me that those are not shoreland properties, that they are wetland properties that are not otherwise protected, perhaps, and having them in there suggests to me that there are no special protections for wetlands. And I look at other places in the report.
Let's let him answer that one.
Well, but this is connected with it. There are other places in the report that allow all kinds of waivers for all existing standards for everything, including wetlands. So I am really concerned about the fact that there is not proper protection of wetlands in all of this area.
So I don't want to dive too deeply into this yet, Phyllis, because that's in the section we haven't discussed yet. That's in the housing one, so we'll go through that next. But in all of these sections, any wetlands protections, whether that's in the workforce housing or the planned unit development or clusters or any of those stand regardless. Those are part of the zoning ordinance. So none of the other sections of the zoning ordinance supersede any wetlands protections. The shoreland overlay district is a little bit different because that's 250 feet from the lake. There's lots of buildable area within a shoreland overlay district. The wetlands themselves are the wetlands, so it's a slightly different thing. But I don't want to go too deeply into the workforce housing one yet, unless if there's other questions that are related to the four that we've talked about already.
Well, my concern just is that from the point of view of workforce housing, it's probably going to be built on land that is less expensive than other land that has wetlands in it or near wetlands or wherever is probably less expensive than other land, and therefore it probably is where they would look first for workforce housing. That means right next to Crescenti Bog, for instance, and I just don't see the protection for wetlands and the buffer zones and all that for wetlands.
Well, those protections are built into the zoning ordinance.
Yes, and there's plenty of language in here allowing all kinds of waivers on much easier grounds than in the past. So I'm concerned about the wetlands, because housing you can take up and down. But once you've destroyed a wetland, you can't put it back very easily.
And so, Phyllis, you'll find comfort that the state RSA for workforce housing, it is built right into the RSA that the planning boards anywhere in the state, New London or otherwise, still have to abide by all environmental policies and sewage disposal policies, whether that's through a septic system or town sewer. And so the towns don't have the ability to waive those over and above. The RSA has that right in there. I don't have the language in front of me, but that protection is in there at the state level over and above ours.
Well, I hope so. Maybe I'll point to another section later.
Okay, thank you.
Howard Hoke. Regarding the petitioned amendment and your reference to Knights Hill Nature Park, which I have a personal interest in, might understand the petitioned article would specifically approve the use of the land that's Knights Hill Park, as opposed to the way things are now, because it doesn't specifically approve it. It's not an approved use, and there could be problems down the road.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
That is a correct. I should have had you up here, Howard.
I just like to, the language is a little difficult for me to get my head around. I just wanted to make sure I understood the purpose.
You are correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Peter?
Just a clarification, the amendment regarding private trails Would that cover the Pine Hill Ski Club, because they're blessed by a number of easements that private owners grant for the purposes of those trails? Does that include them?
Yes, that's a good example, Peter. And some of the trails may be in the conservation section of town that already has that in their section, but obviously those trails transcend several zoning districts, so this would allow for that to be codified everywhere.
Okay,
It's ready to jump into the housing?
forge ahead.
All right.
I just want you to look at the clock.
Yes, we've already chewed through a few minutes, so we'll try to be quick. So, as most of you are aware, the town of New London enacted a housing commission several years ago. They have worked really hard this year with a consultant to go through our workforce housing overlay district, which you'll find the proposed modified version starting on Z4. And then back at the end of the summer, early fall, they brought that to the planning board. And then the planning board and the housing commission had like 6-8 meetings with the Housing Commission working through this, and what you see here today is a result of that cooperative effort. So when the workforce housing district was written in 2009, it was in reaction to legislation that happened at the time requiring towns to provide reasonable and realistic opportunities for workforce housing. And so the New London Planning Board in 2009 was relatively innovative and progressive in their approach and wrote an ordinance that allows for a lot of latitude based on what a developer tells the planning board they need for a number of units to make a workforce housing project financially feasible, which, New Hampshire Housing used our ordinance as an example around the state quite a bit in the last decade. Unfortunately, some of the feedback that we've heard in recent years is it provides too much ambiguity for a developer, that there's no baseline guarantee for them, and so for them to invest the time and resources into planning a project, not really knowing if the planning board is going to give them 5 units on that site or 25 units on that site, they just didn't bite off on the projects to start with because they didn't have any baseline assurity of, okay, I can get 6 townhomes on that site, and it's worth me investigating that project and going forward. So what you see here is a modification of the ordinance that exists today. Many of those waivers and bonuses or increases that are built into our existing ordinance stay in place if the developer comes and what we have proposed does not work for them. They can request the planning board review it just as they would today, and that really doesn't change. But what this does is provides a baseline for some density bonuses and some different styles of housing. So as it exists today, there's one multifamily category in the workforce housing. Now, the Housing Commission recognized that, perhaps not all multifamily fits in all places throughout town. Maybe there's a style that works in one place and doesn't in another. So they broke it into 2 categories. And so multifamily is anything 3 units or more. So there's 2 categories. One of a multifamily garden style, which is I guess what you would think of for like the building in the back of Fenwood, where they have the condos that are sort of common entrance or Lion Brook, that sort of style of building. And then there's multifamily townhome, which is more of like a hilltop style or, Seasons, Highland Ridge, where they're, attached by common walls, but they have exterior entrances of their, their own. They're not sharing that with somebody. And so the change of use, or the use table was changed to recognize that townhomes may be, a style that is more appropriate in some areas of town, like R2 or Hilltop or Highland Ridge, some other existing townhome developments already are. And the garden style probably isn't appropriate in the sort of more rural areas of town. So you'll see that is one change in the first couple of pages. Now, touching on what Phyllis brought up, the reason for the exclusion of the workforce housing overlay, or the shoreland overlay within the workforce housing overlay, is really because when it comes to single-family homes, we put in a new density bonus formula, and there was concern that a developer could manipulate that density bonus for single family to build more houses in an environmentally sensitive area of the waterfront, because it allows them to get, so if you had a 10-unit single family development in R2, which would require 20 acres with 2-acre zoning, they can get a 40% bonus on their density if of that extra 40%, so of that extra 4 units, if they guarantee that 3 of those units are workforce housing, then they can build a total of 14 units, so that the developer, because oftentimes developers are breaking even on workforce units. And so just having them have 3 extra workforce units, it's not going to be enough of a hook for them to actually build them. So by giving them 1 additional market rate unit, which is where they make their profit, then they are on the hook for building 3 workforce units for the town. So it comes out to a total of 14 units. There's an advantage to the developer that they're putting in 1 more market rate unit, but there's an advantage to the wider community that in order to get that, they're at least providing some workforce housing where they typically would probably just not deal with the workforce housing altogether. And so we didn't want that to be manipulated in places like the shoreland overlay, where 1 more market rate unit could be a substantial difference in the bottom line for the developer, but could also have substantial impacts to the development of our sensitive lakes and environmental resources. And so in the concerns with the wetlands, all of the wetlands overlays and protections that are built into the ordinance, they exist no matter what kind of development you are doing. They are in the ordinance, those maps are approved, the wetland soils are there, whether they're in the workforce housing overlay or whether it's a regular development going on that. The addition of those 2 lots, that really doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the land or the environmental resources. Those are actually I actually had this open. Physically, the college lot, which was exempt originally, and I'm not sure why that was at that point, and the hospital lot. Though neither institution at this point has plans to build workforce housing, I think they both recognize that there may come a time in the future when having some housing on site for employees may be a reality that they need to explore, and they would like to at least have that ability should that be something that they need to do. And so with the blessing of the hospital and college, we are proposing adding their 2 lots back in. It does not include adding in the institutional recreation lot, which is Kelsey Field. I don't think the college has any interest in putting housing there. It's removed from the campus. It's used in a recreational format. It's just not something that either they or the planning board wanted to pursue. There are a fair amount of changes in here to the administration processes, and not something I think we necessarily need to go into great lengths about. Some of the changes came from our attorney suggesting, these things are in state law. You really shouldn't have them in your ordinance, because if the state law changes, then your ordinance is sort of lagging behind and you're caught in this catch-up period. And so this would adjust that so that we're not sort of playing that catch-up. And then on page Z10, that is the table that sort of explains that single-family home density bonus that I went through. And it seems complex. I think the planning board, when we first sat down and the housing commission was here explaining it, our eyes rolled back in our heads, probably similarly to how you're feeling. But I think once you sit here and read through it, it does make sense, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. Peter or Tim, do either of you have anything else you want to add? I think it may be more beneficial to take questions, but Peter.
No, you said it very well, Adam. I would just add, as a retired developer, that having predictability is so important to developers. The survival of a developer is based really on projects that they don't do, because their time and resources are limited. And so predictability is so important in bylaws, so a developer can quickly, as they normally do, evaluate whether it makes sense to hire architects and engineers and look at financing and run pro formas on a piece of property they want to develop. So that was the key element that was the primary target. I would also add that the existing bylaw, the bylaw that exists today for workforce housing has just a complete blanket waiver across most categories. And that speaks to predictability, as Adam said. What we've done is added a base level of development so developers can quickly decide, does it make sense for a particular parcel? And then if they want an exception, they want to build a little bit more, that's not allowed by the establishment of the base, then they can open up their books and say, well, here's the financing and here's what it costs, but they have to justify it with a great deal of detail. So I'm just elaborating on what Adam said, but it works really, I think it will work. Lastly, I would say this isn't a solution that's going to happen overnight. We're not going to see developers coming in on Thursday of next week saying, okay, we want to talk to the planning board. But we hope that it will happen over time and suit the town appropriately. Thank you.
And one thing I should add quickly, I didn't really touch on this. So the actual densities for garden and townhome, so for garden-style buildings, it would be 10 units per acre of net tract area. And so Phyllis, in the definition of net tract area, it removes any wetlands within that. So if you have an acre, but a half acre of that is wet, that's removed from that net tract area so that you really only have a half an acre. And so by this, you would only be allowed 5 units because you only have half an acre. So it takes the wetlands out of the calculability of the overall density from the start. And then townhomes would be 6 units of net tract area.
Thank you for making a very complex topic understandable. You did a great job. Thank you. Now we will move on to the second part of our meeting, which is to have look at the warrant articles. So you're going to be discussing warrant articles 2 through 27 that we will act upon and vote on Wednesday in the gymnasium of the Kearsarge School District Learning Campus. So I don't know who wants to start. You can go in order.
Flip forward as far as which one will start it.
Well,
Okay, Article 3.
okay, so for those of you in the audience, each of us has 8 of the articles on the warrant is our primary purpose of leading the discussion. And I drew the first one. This is a very controversial subject. This is an article brought forward by petition. I do not see the lead petitioner here today, so I will go on and talk very briefly about it. There are really 3 aspects of this article. One is the need for a future police station. I will not talk about that this morning. I believe, Chief, that you're going to conduct a tour of the police station at the end of this. So at 9 o'clock, people who want to understand the need for a new police station, the Chief Cobb will be here to lead that. I also believe that on Election Day, on Tuesday, that every hour on the hour, there will be the opportunity for voters to tour the police station. So we'll ignore the need this morning. The second piece of this is picking a site. In late 2021, the Select Board agreed to setting up a committee to look for sites in town for a new police station. That group did an exhaustive study of sites along Newport Road and Main Street, which the police department had identified as being the central corridor that they would look to have a new police station on. And that group eventually came forward with a suggestion that there were 3 possible sites after discussing what was available, what was viable, and so on. Those 3 sites were the Crescenti property on County Road, which is no longer on the table because it's under option for workforce housing and other uses. Second site was the so-called Broome property, which is used to be called Sigma Data, and is located between the Sugar River Bank and the Bar Harbor Bank on Newport Road. It's about 1.4 acres. The third is the so-called Bueling property, which is the one that is being discussed in this article. The selectmen chose not to pursue the Broom property for a variety of reasons, so we have before us the opportunity to buy the Bewley property as the site that came through this whole process that's been going on for several years. For those of you who are not familiar with the Bewley property, up here on the easel, it's maybe a little hard to see from the back of the room, but the yellowed part simply shows you where it is on Newport Road, essentially opposite the post office, and then the down below is shows you more precisely where it is on Newport Road. And can you see it up in the?
Isn't that something?
Ah, look at that.
It's a miracle.
What this additional piece of paper, which you might pass out, shows is where the wetlands are, because wetlands are an issue. So we've got a half a dozen copies of this that maybe can be shared in the audience, because you may not be able to see the thin little lines along the bottom. So basically, the issue here is, will the town appropriate and bond $375,000 or some other number that may be adjusted at the town meeting to buy this piece of land, so that we can proceed with the question of whether or not the need for a police station can be met on this this property. Peter Nichols just said it very appropriately. We need predictability, so further work on developing a scheme for a police station needs the predictability of knowing that this is the site that it could be built on. That's what we're going to be voting on Tuesday night, and because we've got a lot of other things to do this morning, I'll just leave it at saying how the site came to be chosen, and the question of the money will be what we will debate at the town meeting, but there's good reason to think that there's more than one way to value a piece of property.
Bill, could you, though, with regards to background on this particular item, mention the appraisal that was requested by the Board of Selectmen, how that came in, and the subsequent vote that the Board of Selectmen took based on that appraisal?
Sure. So, because we knew that it would be asked, this Board of Selectmen went back to the same appraiser that they had used when they looked at this piece of land in 2018 and got a new appraisal. Unfortunately, from the point of view of a majority of the Board of Selectmen, Nancy raises the question, two of us voted to continue with this, one did not want to continue with it. That appraisal was faulty in several regards, not the least of which, in the opinion of the majority of the Board of Selectmen, it did not adequately look at what the proper use of the land might be. It was appraised as a single residential property, whereas it actually has the capability of having as much as 3 houses on it as a cluster development. I don't know, I haven't looked through this new zoning ordinance carefully as to whether or not it would also qualify for workforce housing. That map there suggests maybe it would, but there's a question about whether the appraiser actually took into consideration how the property might be used. Second of all, the seller, which is the developer, Continuum, also had prepared a market appraisal of the property for the purposes of raising its financing, and they determined that this property, along with the other 2 that you can see just on the screen above us, the other 2 which are, yeah, there you go, thank you, now being highlighted. The 3 properties together had a value of $600,000. This is about double what the appraiser said the property was worth. And third of all, there is the whole issue of when you value a piece of property, is it not really true to say that the value of that property is what a willing buyer and a willing seller agree upon in a objective fashion? In this particular case, the seller and the potential buyer, the town, feel that $375,000 is reasonable. If you look at what has happened to property prices in New London in the past year, 18 months, or if you look back at what was paid for the piece of property that the Colonial Pharmacy is now on, you can see that frequently people value a property very differently from an appraised value. So that's where we are now, but the Board of Selectmen, as in response to Nancy's point, did disagree on this point.
As did the Budget Committee.
Are there any questions about this?
Yes, it's Bob Lyon from New London. Just a couple of questions because I'm trying to understand this. So the town has not voted to spend upwards of $9 to $14 million for a new police station, correct? We've not voted for that.
That's correct.
Yet we're planning on having a vote to buy a piece of land, the intention of which is to build a police station.
That's correct also.
So it's just, I'm trying to think of how I would look at that as a homeowner. If I was thinking of building a house, would I buy a piece of property not knowing if I would build a house? And I don't think that I would. I would buy a piece of property with the intention of building a house. So it seems like maybe just in people's minds, if we buy this piece of property, we're basically buying a police station. Otherwise, the town of New London will become a realtor business, correct? We'd have to go out and sell it. And we'd have to sell a piece of property that's mostly wetland, that mostly can't be used for anything. So that's my first question is, why are we doing this now? Why don't we, it seems like it's backwards. Why don't we vote for the police station first and then decide what piece of property to get? That's my first question. My second question is, if we don't think that the initial appraisal was correct, it was under because of the reasons you stated, why didn't we have our town assessor go back and reassess it based on that new information? I mean, to say that property values have gone up, sure they have. I don't know what the property values of wetland property is. I don't think they've gone up as much as buildable property. So it just, I'm trying to understand and wrap my mind around the sequence of how this is happening, and it almost seems backwards. So if you could respond to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. That's very helpful. Let me take the wetland piece. You said three different things there, I think. Let me take the wetland piece first. If you look at the rendering that's going around, you'll note that less than 2 acres of the land are actually delineated as wetlands. Is the feeling in many people who haven't walked that land, who haven't seen that particular engineering study and so on, that this is all wetlands. This is a piece of property that actually could hold up to 3 individual houses of 3,000 square feet each. It's a piece of property that at one point a developer, if you look in the corner of the piece of paper that's going around, thought they could put workforce housing on. So this property has some wetlands on it, to Phyllis's point, but it is not all wetlands at all. The wetlands are mostly along Newport Road, so it's erroneous to say this is a property that's wetlands.
I didn't say it was all wetlands.
No.
I said it contained wetlands, so to me that brings the value down, which gets to my second question
Sure.
about the appraisal.
Right, well, if it brings it down, then if you were an appraiser, you might say, well, what could you do with this property? And you might be able to put 3 houses on it, and $125,000 per lot for a house in New London is not unreasonable.
Well, that's my second question. Why didn't we
Reappraise it using the town. Why didn't we reappraise it using the town assessor? We were certainly willing to do that for the first appraisal, but then you come back and you say, well, it really wasn't accurate, but we didn't send out the appraiser again, and we're just kind of guessing as to what it might be worth.
Well, so that just, you're interchanging the term appraiser and assessor. The town assessor is not an appraiser. And she doesn't go out and value individual properties for the purpose of determining whether somebody should buy it or sell it. She uses a statistical model to determine, based on property they've sold, what it is worth. Currently, you may know that the assessed value, the average assessed value of property, all property in New London, is at about 62% of what recent sales of similar properties have been. So you could also apply that to this situation. The third point is the one that I tried to make initially, I guess I missed on, that Peter Nichols mentioned, which is predictability. You wouldn't probably decide to go out and design a police station that might cost $9 million or $14 million, whatever number you want to use, if you didn't know where you were going to put it. So you've got to have the site first. So in your example of your home, you would have decided, well, this is the property that I want to do, and you would have done some preliminary thinking about what you might do on that particular property. Were there wetlands? Is there public water, public sewer, and so on? But you wouldn't have engaged the engineering firm to do the additional work or your architect to build the building and so on. And we have an even more difficult situation here because in your personal example, you and your family would have decided that's what you want to do. In our case, our family is slightly larger. It's 4,000 people. And so some subset of that 4,000 people have to make these decisions one step at a time. And so what we're doing here is saying, this is the site that this site committee is one of the three that they suggested would be suitable for this purpose is going to do. And so we're now asking our family to buy this piece of property for that purpose. Then we will go through the process of determining how to build on it and so on. The town meeting this next year, the year after, whenever that finally happens, will again come back. The family will come back and decide whether they like the design, whether they feel the cost is acceptable and so on. But we don't have much choice because every year things can change.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong here, it's not a criticism, it just seems like it's a slippery slope.
It is.
If I've got 7 acres of land, ostensibly obtained for the intent purpose of getting a police station.
Thanks.
and you have a vote, he's not talking anymore.
We may as well put it up. We've already got the land. We may as well build it now. It seems like a very slippery slope to me. I understand what you're saying, but to me, my own opinion, it still seems backwards.
So the answer would be, how else would you go about this? And the answer is, well, hopefully it would be nice if 20 years ago the town had the foresight to buy property, bought the property or kept property from the school district or bought King Hill or whatever, but that's not what happened. We are where we are.
No. I'm going to ask somebody else to have a turn. I'm going to ask you to yield.
No, you're fine. You're good. That's fine.
Someone else wants to make a comment?
Sure. Hello, my name is Karen Epstein, and actually I have a kind of a question. And using the family example, has impact been estimated on affordability?
Pardon?
Has there been any estimate on the cost of the project? So, for example, you're using that this land would be used to construct a police station.
Yes.
Do we have any estimate on what the cost of the police station would be and have flowed that through to the average taxpayer? Because I'm just trying to think in terms of affordability, using the family example. If I were to buy a piece of land, I'd have a certain cost in mind of the house and what that would cost me, et cetera.
Great question. We were going to talk about that at town meeting, but we can do it right here. There have been estimates that this would cost anywhere from $4.5 to $14 million. We've heard that range. We've looked at $8 million as a sort of midpoint of that. We've gone to the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank and asked them specifically to tell us what a bond for that amount of money would entail, and it's come back. It would be about 50 cents on the tax rate or about $250 a year for a $500,000 home. So look at it as less than $1 a day.
Are there any other questions?
Joe Cardillo. A couple of procedural questions. Going back through the process, we did have an appraisal a few years back that came in at $70,000. Selectmen felt it was part of their due diligence to have a new appraisal, which came in at $150,000. And they felt unanimously, 3-0, that they couldn't, in good conscience, put this in front of the voters because the appraisal did not come in correctly. My procedural question is, I've now sat through several bond hearings, and again this morning, and I have yet to see the lead party in this petitioned effort to get it moved forward ever speak to why they initiated the petition. So my procedural question is, on Wednesday night, are we assured that the lead person who brought this petition forward will present this article. That's the first procedural question. The second one is, Bill is absolutely correct as far as the real test of value on a piece of land is a willing seller and a willing buyer at an arm's length transaction that can get a deal done at a price they both agree to. So as we sit here this morning, I think if we were to present anything to anybody, if I was to involved in one of my commercial transactions, needed to go to an approval on a lender or anything else, I would need to show all the parties involved, attorneys, et cetera, that we had an agreement in writing that says, yeah, we do have an agreement at a said price. So to this date, have we executed between both parties a letter of intent, a memorandum of understanding, or an executed purchase and sales agreement that says the town of New London is willing to buy this at $375,000 if the voters approve the $375,000. And so short of anything in writing, are we just simply working on a handshake agreement and putting this in front of the voters? So those are my two procedural questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask the moderator to answer the first one.
Thank you, Joe, for posing that question, because I know a lot of other folks probably have the same concerns. Rest assured, the drafter and initiator of this article has sent me an email saying they will be first to speak in favor of it. And there'll be, I think, at least one other person following her. The proponents of the article get to speak first, and when they've completed their presentations, those against it will have an equal opportunity to speak. And I'll just say it right now, if you know you're going to speak against this, I need to have your name that night so I can make sure that you get put on the list, that you get the requisite time that you wish to make your point. And while I have the microphone, I also want to point out that the text of Article 3 does not limit the use to a police department. It says intent, but it says and or other municipal needs. It's up to the townspeople to use that parcel for whatever they want to use it for if they decide to buy it. Thank you.
And I'll ask the town administrator to address the legal question.
For some months, the Board of Selectmen worked on getting a purchase and sale agreement with the seller. The seller is very motivated to sell this property and hopes to be able to sell it to the town of New London. One of the criteria the selectmen put on it was that the appraisal that was in process would come out at least as high as the purchase price. When that did not happen, when the $150,000 appraisal came in, all work stopped on getting the purchase and sale agreement. The buyer was contacted and spoke with the selectmen to see if he would change his price to the $150,000 appraised value, and he said no. So where we are today is that we continue to have a seller who is very motivated to sell to the town of New London. He would love to see the town of New London own this, but he has so far indicated that he needs $375,000 for the property. So this means at town meeting on Wednesday evening, if the town does indeed decide to buy it for $375,000, Joe Hogan, the owner, will get a call and he will know that. So he will then have the opportunity to sell the property to the town of New London. If between now and Wednesday, when he gets that phone call, if somebody approaches him and offers him more, he can certainly sell it. So it's true that at this point, the property owner is free to sell this property or even to decide not to sell it to us. So the town would be out no money if it votes to purchase it and the property is no longer available. In that case, I think we'll have some disappointed citizens, but the town won't be out any money.
Well, real short, Maureen, I promise. So my concern is this, the people, and they've done a great job with an effort to move this forward, and it would be unfortunate that we have a vote that favorably says, let's buy this land. We'll see what happens on Tuesday night. The fact is, without a written agreement, that vote can go down, and 2 days later, a group could come out and offer the sellers $500,000, and we are still out of luck after all the efforts. In my mind, and I think legal advice may say, we're probably in a better place if we had a signed agreement between buyer and seller.
That would avoid any disappointment. I mean, I think voters would be disappointed if they vote yes, and Joe Hogan says, sorry, I've changed my mind. He could change his mind for no reason at all at this point, and that would be disappointing. But the town would not be out any money. They would be disappointed, but they wouldn't be out any money.
Peter Hoagland. Just a quick question. You voted it unanimously not to buy the land versus the appraisal versus the sell price. We have a petition from a number of people in town to get it on the warrant. Now it's a 2-to-1 vote. Yes, let's buy that land. What changed? Why would it not be fiscally responsible not to do that anyway?
Janet, do you want to answer that one? Give me a break.
Peter, originally, we thought that Joe Hogan offered it to the town for $400,000, and we talked about it, and we thought, we came back and we thought $375,000 was a reasonable price for that property. But we went ahead and had an appraisal anyway. In good conscience, we didn't feel that we could go with $375,000 if the appraisal came in at $150,000. Nevertheless, I feel strongly, as I have since 2018, when we had a Harriman study on the Bucher section, that we need a new site for a police station. That has not changed. And I don't feel 7 acres of land for $375,000 is an outrageous price to pay. It will get us moving forward for a new police station, which the town has said overwhelmingly in our master plan and various meetings that we've held, that they want a new site for our police. And that's why I'm in favor of, I did not vote against spending the $375,000 on this petition warrant article.
I'm going to jump in here now because we need to move on. I would like to end the meeting on time. So we're going to go to the next warrant, Article number 4.
We only got 23 more to go. This ought to go quickly.
You guys, I know you can talk
Well, I
very
think that a
quickly.
number of these will go quickly after. So at the last town meeting, voters approved $600,000 for renovations to the interior of this building for several reasons, not the least of which coming out of the pandemic. We realized that we needed to come back to our town hall, which this is, to hold our community meetings, and also to make it nice for social events and other activities that this hall gets used for. There did need to be a number of items that needed to be renovated relative to this. In the context of doing that, as we also learned from the pandemic, because of supply chain issues and cost overrides, we were not able to do all of the work that we wanted in here with the dollar amount that was set, the $600,000. So hence, we are coming back to the town relative to a request, as stated in here, I'll come back to that in a minute, for $275,000. Lately, the work continues. We've done the repainting, we have the acoustic panels on the side, we have the Zoom meetings, which I know a number of people avail themselves of. So the AV equipment, the maintenance items, the new seats that you have, the tables are coming. We'll be redoing the floors, et cetera, et cetera. This is not, I need to stress, an exhaustive redo of this building. We did work on the sprinkler system for here and in those areas of Bucher that are not finished. This, like many other things in town, we have buildings where we have not done a good job of predictive analysis of upkeep. And so we then, when we come to look at those things, it costs a lot of money to fix those things, and some trade-offs need to be made. For instance, a decision was made not to do anything to the balcony. The one scope creep that is in here is that, and if you've heard it all, the heating conductors on all of the sides are inappropriate actually for a building this size, and they create a lot of noise. And so we are having those replaced. That will be an additional $32,000. But that gets offset with not doing the balcony work and some other work. Again, I'll emphasize that this is not entirely going to complete the interior. And then there is still the exterior, because we know that there will need to be continued work on the roof. We have a slate roof up there. We have a cupola that does or does not leak. So I'm just forewarning you. But the good news is, and I will be making a motion, thank you to the moderator, on the night, that we do not need the entire $275. It will be lowered to $186,000 on that night to complete the work that I've just stated. So that's the deal with this particular article.
Are there any questions? Yes, Bob.
Yes, Nancy, I think everybody can hear me.
Yep.
Is this one that covers air conditioning for this building?
Yes.
And that's part of the $186,000 air conditioning, right?
Yes.
So this may sound horrible, but it makes me keep my statement short.
Yep.
People in this room, if your house is air conditioned, please raise your hand. Not even half. Okay, thank you.
But I will state that part of this was based on architectural consultants, that we needed to, you know, whatever the age of this building is, there's not good insulation. And so when we talked about the heating system and so forth, we needed to put in new insulation and an air exchange system and everything else. So the AC just sort of came in with that, but also looking at climate change and looking at this building 10 years out, I will guarantee that most of you will have air conditioning in your house.
I wouldn't make that guarantee if I were you.
Well, okay. So perhaps not you, but I will guarantee.
He's from the Midwest.
Great.
I already have. So, many of you know that I have consistently opposed this amount of spending on this property going back to before I was a selectman, and I've been routinely outvoted on that. But I want to say that in conjunction with having followed through on all this in the past year, working very closely with Phil Sherman, the chairman of the Whipple Building Committee, that I now do support this article. It's, Joe, an example of where the selectmen can change their minds as time goes on and more information is brought forward. So I agree with Bob about the air conditioning, but on the greater picture of things, I'm going to support this article on Wednesday.
Okay, moving on to Article 5.
Article 5 is for money to replace generators that we are used for our pumping stations. Bob Harrington has been able to find has applied for a grant that will pay 25% of loan forgiveness on this. These generators are important for pumping our sewage to Sunapee, and as you all probably have been aware, that it just doesn't go downhill all the way to Sunapee. We've got a few areas where it goes upstream. So anyway, this is what this money will do, and it's important that we pass this.
Can you tell us where those pump stations are?
Well, one's in George's Mills, one's off Seamans Road. Where else?
We have one at High.
One off Newport, right, yeah.
They're everywhere. They're all over town.
There are quite a few of them. Yeah, and also South Pleasant. Yeah, so there are quite a few in town, and they are crucial to making sure that our sewage gets to the plant in Sunapee.
See no questions. Let's move on to Article 6.
Okay, Article 6 has to do with all of the general government operations. The one number under executive seems exceedingly high. If you simply look at the numbers, and that's because the cost of a $200,000 cost of living adjustment to all of the town employees is included in that number rather than being distributed across all of the town departments. Otherwise, I think the items are self-explanatory.
Okay. Article 7.
Article 7 is public safety. That includes the police department, fire department, the Board of Fire Wards, emergency management, and communications department. And basically, the communications department is a regional that serves not only New London, but other towns. And New London currently is paying 67% of the cost, while the other towns are picking up 33% of the cost of that. Emergency management has decreased their budget because they've been successful at compiling emergency supplies necessary to maintain readiness as required. A new expense for the police department is funding for the replacement of pistols, which is absolutely critical in terms of having appropriate functioning firearms available to our police department. Any questions?
Moving right along to Article 8.
Article 8, which is regard to highways, streets, and sanitation. This article is for funding the Public Works Department, including highway, street lighting, transfer station, and the sewer department. In addition to increases for salary and benefit lines already discussed, this budget also includes increased funds for equipment repairs and maintenance. We continue to see increased costs for parts and delays in acquiring new vehicles. Supply chain issues have become a real problem for the highway department when they need a new part for something. So we've seen that at the transfer station when a trailer breaks down and we can't fix it, or it takes longer than necessary to fix it. So this is really an important article to be passed so the Public Works Department can maintain the vehicles. Any questions?
Okay, Article 9.
Okay, this is the article that has to do with our health and welfare departments. It includes payments that we make to the hospital for the ambulance, VNA, Council on Aging, and CASA, the court-appointed special advocates. In addition, it includes funds for the welfare officer and includes payments to vendors like landlords and phone companies and electric companies to assist eligible applicants for assistance.
Okay.
No questions. So Article 10, this is has a lot of things in it: recreation, culture, and conservation. I think the most significant item here is that the decision was made by the Board of Selectmen to return to a full-time recreation director. And in the course of that, Bill, myself, and Kim conducted a full employee search. We had a wide scope and net relative to looking for a new rec director. We did end up hiring Putnam Kidder, who has now transitioned from what had been his part-time role as a director to the full-time role. He did apply, and that was the decision that was made. So that's largely the most significant, I think, increase in this, other than operations at Tracy Memorial Library, which is largely due to salaries. Okay?
Okay. Article 11.
Okay, this is the article to raise and appropriate the sum of $690,242 for the payment of principal and interest of long-term debt. This article funds the town's loans, principal and interest.
Okay, Article 12.
Okay, I've spent a little bit more time on this one because this article funds the town's various capital reserve accounts, which we might say are like savings accounts for future purposes. And in preparing the budget for fiscal year '24, which we're looking at, which is what we're talking about here, we were mindful of the impact of the taxpayer on the operating budget increases that seem to be unavoidable this year due to inflationary conditions that we're experiencing. And in order to lessen the impact of what is an 8.7% increase in the operating budget, payments to the capital reserve funds were decreased by a little bit over 50%. And you can see that in the numbers on this table. This allowed the overall budget increase to come in at 2.1%. Now, in the coming months, after we get through town meeting, the Board of Selectmen, the Budget Committee, and the Planning Board will begin to review all of the capital reserve funds to determine an appropriate level of funding for each year and to revisit the purposes of each of these funds in order that we can be sure that we do have adequate funds in these these accounts. Undoubtedly, some of these accounts will have to be funded with more money in the coming year, and others we may decide actually that, making a closer look, that perhaps we have adequate funds in them already. But for the time being, the major reduction here of over 50% was put in place for this year in order to offset the large increase in the operating budget in order to keep the tax rate reasonably comfortable.
Okay, Article 13, so now the next several articles actually begins the process of then spending out of the capital reserve fund. The first one up is a request to use $64,000 of that capital request fund for the purchase of mobile radios for the fire department.
And the next one, spending money for a trailer, right?
So if we had had the money for the parts, we probably wouldn't have needed to do, no, I'm kidding. This is $160,000 for the purchase of a refuge trailer to replace one that is currently being used to haul our trash out of the town of New London to where it is being disposed of.
Okay, and the next one is to spend $317,832 to buy a new six-wheel dump truck to replace the 2003 truck that we now have, which after 20 years is ended its useful service to the town. The used truck will be sold and that revenue accredited to the town.
Article 16, always a favorite topic, but paving gravel roads, we're requesting $174,500. Actually, $100,000 of that will come out of capital reserves, and $74,000 will come out of the Municipal and Regional Transportation Improvement Fund, which is a fund that you get taxed. Whenever you register your motor vehicle, $5 goes into this kitty per state law. So.
Go ahead.
Okay, Article 17 is about education and for waste reduction, and we're asking $12,000 for this, and Maureen might want to speak to this initiative.
This initiative grew out of the Waste Reduction Committee, and we're asking for $12,000 to expand the compost pilot program to 10% of the residents in New London. So 160 households would be able to compost their food scraps. And I just want to say right now that 20 households have diverted 2.5 tons of food scraps in 5 months. So we're hoping to expand it to 10% of the town, and we're also hoping to continue our educational efforts through website modifications and we're having an Earth Day educational forum about various aspects of plastic reduction, composting. We're going to have a composting demonstration on the library lawn. And so it's educational efforts. We're hoping to educate the town as best we can. And sometimes that requires a little bit of money.
Why only 10%?
Because by law, we are only able to, well, this is a two-part answer. By law, we're only allowed to keep 1 cubic yard on the premises of the transfer station because we have a certain permit. And our permit only allows us to keep 1 cubic yard. Now, if we became very successful, we could have 2 pickups, but we didn't want to go out on the limb for that because we don't know how successful this expansion will be. So we're taking baby steps. Yes? The dollar impact is the pickup. Currently, we have a company, a small compost dedicated company called Renewal Compost, picks the food scraps up once a week, and they charge us $78 a week for that pickup. There was also an initial startup of the buckets that people have to have their food scraps in that identifies them as part of the program. Each of those buckets is $10. So that's, $1,600 for buckets.
Say the tipping fee.
Oh, you're asking about the tipping fees. Yes, of course, I don't have that in front of me, but do you remember what the $55 per ton. So as you can see, this is not like a huge financial impact, but our committee feels that it's worth it for the environment because of the methane gas emissions in landfills due to food scraps anaerobically disintegrating. So at this point in time, we're hoping as a committee to just break even in terms of finances. Maybe we will next year, but probably not. Okay. Thank you for the plug, for the opportunity.
Okay, on to number 18, and believe it or not, Kim assigned these numbers, and the fact that I got the next one again related to the police facility is a random choice here. So this article asks for $50,000 to be used by the selectmen to begin the process of planning for a new police facility once a site is chosen, so that when the request for funding for the police station comes before the town meeting voters will have enough information to make an informal decision. In other words, this will be used for architectural and engineering work once there is a site on which a possible police station could be built, which would then come before the town meeting for the funding.
Okay. Article 19.
This seeks to withdrawal of $132,303 from the Fire Vehicles Replacement Capital Reserve Fund. This will go towards the second payment for the new fire engine that was approved at last year's town meeting. Needless to say, the cost of these vehicles are going up substantially, and so we agreed to pay for it in installments.
Okay, let's hear about the sewer lagoons.
Okay, this is Article 20, and to see if the town will vote to discontinue the Sewer Lagoon Capital Reserve Fund. This was established to close the sewer lagoons, and maybe not all of you are aware, the sewer lagoons were located on South Pleasant Street, directly across from the Public Works Department. And there are hiking trails and all sorts of conservation. The Lion Brook Conservation Trail is back there. So the sewer lagoons are closed properly. The state has signed off on it, and we have $5,205.58 that will be deposited into the town's general fund. But the town has to vote to discontinue this fund. Any questions? Okay. Nope.
Okay, on to 21. This is a housekeeping matter. Any of the capital reserve types of funds that the town has cannot be expended except by vote of the town meeting unless the voters appoint the selectmen agents to make that disbursement. In this particular case, we're asking the town to agree that the selectmen become agents to expend the municipal and regional transportation improvement fund, which Nancy referred to in reference to the gravel roads. That will allow us to continue to do projects like gravel roads and so on without having to go on to back to the town meeting every time we need money.
Article 22, this group has already heard from Jamie Hess, but I just want to remind you about the community aggregate power that you've already heard about. Go ahead.
So the Energy Committee, as Maureen indicated, has done a tremendous amount of work towards preparing the Town of New London Community Power Electric Aggregation Plan. This is more of a procedural article in that there's no taxpayer funds used to operate this New London Community Power. It's just bringing to the town the agreement that we will continue to participate in this. The idea being that we will continue to be able to offset the high costs of Eversource by our community aggregate proposal. So.
Okay? Can we take Article 23 and 24 together, Janet?
Sure. And I want to add one more thing about the sewer lagoons. We did, the Energy Committee has recommended solar arrays in various places, and there is a ground-mounted solar array on, in the area where the sewer lagoons had been. So it was a good site for that. It's very flat and gets a lot of sun. I didn't mention that.
And they're actually at the end of Frothingham Road, not directly across from the Public Works, so you have to go down Frothingham Road, so they're well hidden in there.
For a view.
Yeah, they're not an eyesore. Okay. 23, to see if the town will vote to readopt the provisions of RSA 72:28-2, previously adopted in 2006, for an optional veterans tax credit on residential property at $500 a year. Articles 23 and 24 are on the warrant because New Hampshire House Bill 1667, expanding the eligibility criteria for certain veterans' property tax credits, became effective July 26, 2022. Since our current credits under RSA 72:28 and 72:28B were adopted through town meeting previously, a change in the language of the laws requires that the town must readopt the credits through the same process, or they can no longer be offered in their current form. These articles seek to maintain the credit amounts for residents currently receiving them and would also, as the legislature intended, expand eligibility to include active duty military still currently serving. Any questions?
Couldn't have said it better, Janet.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay, no questions. Let's go on to number 25.
Sure, so this is to modify the elderly exemption from property tax. This basically, there has not been an adjustment made since 2009. And so this article seeks to raise the income limits to $40,000 and exemption amounts of $65,000, $80,000, and $100,000 depending on age. So it's just really adjusting those elderly tax exemptions.
Okay, seeing no questions or comments, let's go on to 26.
26 is to modify the blind exemption. This article seeks to raise the blind exemption amount from the current $15,000 exemption to $50,000 to recognize the economic changes since 2004, when this exemption was adopted.
I have a question on this one.
Okay?
Why is it, are other disabilities, why is it just the blind exemption rather than cerebral palsy or hearing impaired, or why is that?
I'll let Kim answer this one. This is
It's state law.
Oh,
And
so,
I know, I think through history, people have felt that blindness is, I don't know, it's one that comes to mind
Better watch it.
more. I don't know. I mean, there are plenty of disabilities,
Yeah.
but the law recognizes blindness as one to be singled out for property tax help.
So
It's a good question. I'll ask the Governor's Commission.
oh, good, would you?
I will.
Okay, number 27. Oh, we don't have to really do that one, do we?
That's one where everybody says thank you.
Yes, and thank you for coming and voting, and I hope to see you all at town meeting. Sir, we are going to speak to David Keith and Kristen. Can you stand up, identify, and maybe give us a quick blurb about why you would like to be on the Kearsarge Regional School District School Board?
Thank you. For everyone who doesn't know, my name is David Keith, and I'm running for the open seat on the school board. A little bit about myself. Originally, I grew up in Warner. I graduated from Kearsarge in 2004. I've lived here in town for going on 3 years, and I've also worked for the town of New London for the past 10 years. I have 2 kids here in the elementary school, and I also have 14 years experience in the career of law enforcement, which I feel would be valuable to bring to the board. Some of my main goals, if elected to the school board, is I want to make sure that our schools and our students across the district are safe. I want to make sure that proper funding is being discovered and attained and being used and spent appropriately to reinforce security measures throughout our school, because no one wants anything to happen at a school. Also, I want to foster positive relationships throughout the district with first responders, police officers, firefighters in every town, because for the past year and a half, 2 years, we've gotten a lot better here in New London, and I want to continue that throughout the district. Also, I feel that we have a great group of administrators, teachers, and support staff, and in a competitive employment field, I want to make sure we retain them. I want to make sure that they have the proper training and they get the most training in everything to basically foster a positive learning experience in our children. If elected, I'm very motivated to learn more about the district and participate more. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Johnson. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to introduce myself, as I know I'm a relatively unknown person in this space. I will share a little bit about myself, my professional background, and my interest, and what I can positively contribute should I be elected to this role. We moved to this area in 2010. I grew up in the Midwest. I am a public school graduate. We bought our home in New London in 2012. I have a third grade student at Kearsarge in New London. I know what it feels like to be the parent at home in remote learning in the time of COVID. I also know the perspective taking of advocating for children in that space and the importance of balancing individual needs with the needs of the collective within the school district. I also have professional background in human growth and development as my educational background, as well as thanatology, which is a study of grief and loss and end-of-life care. So I worked for a number of years in education, both as a Peace Corps volunteer serving in the country of Slovakia, a bordering country of Ukraine, where I taught English as a foreign language. Coming back to the United States, I worked at a domestic violence shelter, as well as became a child life specialist and worked for a child life specialist in the hospital setting for a number of years, which is the focus of child development and advocating for children, preparing for medical procedures, and encouraging conversations within the team. Now I work at the Jack Burns Center for Palliative and Hospice Care, and my role is both bereavement programming and volunteer programming, so I know the importance of servant leadership and of listening intently, of communicating with compassion and respect, and making informed decisions. I believe that whatever happens in this, I see this as a learning experience in how I can contribute to this town, and I thank you for this time.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes to spare. Does anybody want to say anything? Go ahead.
Phyllis Pietro, I would like to ask a question on another subject that's come up. I understand that the Continuum Project wants to apply for a grant to do something about the wood that they're harvesting down on that property where they've despoiled the whole land and cut down the trees. They met with the select board the other day. I wonder if you could tell us what they're planning to do, what kind of grant they want, and I would like to suggest that if we do anything connected with energy with them, that Jamie Perkins and our energy committee be involved in it, because I don't think these Continuum people know. I think they're over their heads in most of what they're doing, and I think Jamie Perkins could probably provide very helpful advice on that. So could you tell us what's going on with that proposal?
Thank you, Phyllis. So Jamie Hess, they did speak in front of the Energy Commission. They also brought to the Planning Board, I believe, their proposal to do a wood chip burning plant, if you will, for heating, which uses refuse wood and so forth. So it's not necessarily targeted purposefully on the wood chips that are currently there. So it's the overall heating plant. What they came to the Board of Selectmen and requested was a letter of support for a grant application that they are making to the U.S. Department of Agriculture to receive funding to offset the costs of this wood chip plant, quite frankly.
Correct. So Spring Ledge Farm already has this system in place for their usage in the greenhouse and in their farm stand, and I believe also in Greg Berger's house. And then we actually have a few private systems in homes where it's like a conventional furnace, but it's fueled with wood chips that are harvested throughout the state. It's seen as a green energy source. And so this plant was part of the site plan that came to the planning board, I think, last summer. And it more or less looks like one of the independent cottages. Obviously, there's a chimney that comes out of it, but it's not, it's not a plant like what you see in George's Mills. You really don't, it doesn't, it's hard to sort of paint the picture without the actual imagery, but it looks more like a residential garage, and it provides steam heat, and it can be the facility that they have built will not only heat all of the buildings on site, but will also be piped under the sidewalks so that all of the sidewalks will be heated, so that they don't have to have snow removal, but also so that it cuts down on the chemicals that you are using to, salt or anything else, so that as runoff goes into the watershed, you're not adding different chemicals to that.
Know more about what, Phyllis?
She said maybe you could explain things in municipal matters.
What? I don't understand
About
what you
the
want.
Park Place.
I'll toss that to Adam. He can write an article on the site plan that's been approved. How about that? Is that what you mean, Phyllis? Their energy plant, the way they're going to heat their development, it has already gone through the planning board. Is that what you'd like more info on?
Sure.
There you go, Adam.
Maybe
Your
we
next
can have him
article will
come
be
here.
on that.
Maybe we can have him come here to talk to this group, if we can get him. Okay. Yes?
Where would the police chief like people to want to gather? Start in the lobby, okay.
Thank you all for coming.